Shawn McCarthy. Welcome to the Bookaholic Podcast.
Glad to be here. I
Yes,
love the
so
name,
glad
actually.
to have you here. So glad to have you here. So today we're going to be talking about your novel that's coming out this summer called Local Honey. And I'm so intrigued by that because you've chosen to have a female lead, and also your story takes place in the 1950s. Now, just to explain to some folks in different pockets of the world, the 1950s in the United States was a pivotal time. America was coming out of the horrors of World War II. There was a lot of prosperity going on in the 1950s. And just as a point of context, I think that the show I Love Lucy, which I watch still till today, helps us to romanticize a little
Sure,
bit of the
sure.
1950s.
That's
It just
separate beds and all, yeah.
yeah, gives us a little insight to that. So,
Mhm.
why did you choose to write a novel, first of all, with a female lead in the
Well,
1950s?
interestingly, I based the idea for the novel on the fact that I was born in the late 50s and I grew up in the 60s and 70s. So the people that I saw every day were people from that era, and including a lot of soldiers. My father was one, my grandfather was one. And so there is a female lead, but as much of the story is about an ex-soldier, a wounded ex-soldier who wasn't wounded that badly, but enough that it changed his life. Jim Yao is the name of the character in the movie. Excuse me, the movie, the book. Hopefully, a
Right.
movie someday, right? We're still
Yes,
thinking my part.
absolutely. That was a call out. That was a shout out to the universe.
There we go. There we go. One can only hope, right? But
Yes.
anyway, in the book, he is an ex-soldier who gets wounded through his hand, manages to find his way again in life, and becomes a police officer. There's things that bother him. He has to modify his gun a little bit to use it. He comes to terms with it, and then eventually gets married, has a wife and child, which is a backstory. It's mentioned in the book, but it's not covered extensively. But then this woman he dated in high school, who was very poor, wrong side of the tracks, mother was a criminal, and she comes back to try to start a legitimate business and be part of the town again. And so
Right.
that's where the book starts.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to take a look at the 1950s because in some ways, Jim represents a guy where things are going okay. He had a rough time in the war, but he got through it, manages to establish himself and is living what he thinks is his best life. And then he comes in contact with this woman who really was from like I said, the other side of the tracks. But he loved her at one time. And I think
Right.
he feels a pull, a dichotomy. And in the meantime, at the beginning of the book, this woman is doing very well. She manages to restart her farm, manages to raise bees out in the field, and is selling honey locally in her farm stand to local restaurants. But part of the problem that she has in her life is that her mother was a criminal who left a trail of kind of destruction behind her by helping people in banks do some shady dealing, spend money at her farm with some women who were also doing some shady dealings. And she left a really bad taste in the mouth of a lot of people, including one woman whose father ended up going bankrupt because of the time that she spent there. So the
Um,
idea is that there are people in this town who really don't want her back again, really do not want to see her successful. And of
right.
course, Jim feels a pull in both directions because he has a love for this woman, but at the same time, he understands the town may not like her. But the main thing about Becky is she knows what it's like to be poor and wants to help other people who are in the same situation, which in her mind means letting them all camp on her farm and
Right.
live whatever lives they want. So keep in mind
Right.
when the early 50s is not that far removed from what we called back then Hoovervilles, because President Hoover was president at a time when we were all suffering from the Great Depression. And that's a lot of times where poor people ended up, was living on these farms, encampments, under bridges, things like that. And 1951 is not very far removed from that time. So again, people in the town see that, and there's not a lot of empathy for the poor people who are having a tough time surviving in a society that is suddenly seeing great advances, because post-World War II, America, the economy took off for some
Yeah.
people, not all.
Yes.
You know,
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's a lot to unpack there. So I think I want to go to the fact that the woman character, the one that came back and was raising the bees for honey, the town or the people in the surrounding area is holding her mother's crimes against her. I'm assuming the mother is deceased in the story now.
we don't know what happened to the mother the way the story is, because when she got run out of town, she and her daughter, excuse me, who may or may not be her daughter, fled town together, but found that they really couldn't work together when there was no criminal enterprise to manage. And so they ended up going their separate ways, along with several other people who left with her. So you start to realize that the mother was really a shady character to begin with, including abandoning her own daughter at some point. This is what this woman, Becky, has had to deal with much of her life, is just living life on the margins, on the edges. And
Right.
I think it's interesting because, again, I grew up in a small town, and I grew up in central New York, not too far from Rochester, New York. And from my town was close enough in 20, 25 miles. A lot of people commuted into the city, and we became a suburb. The highways came out and changed. And the highway coming into the town is a catalyst for things happening in this book too.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
so yeah, there was a lot of changes going on, and sometimes change ends up being a catalyst for all sorts of conflict. And I think that's what we have in this book, is that the change, it showed success for some, but for those who couldn't participate, actually the opposite happens. You start sliding backwards.
Absolutely, absolutely. And now let's talk about the Hooverville. And I had never heard that term. That's a little piece of history I did not know or realize about the Hoovervilles from the time that President Hoover was the president during the Depression. I didn't realize that. So I guess the folks in town who were really prosperous were looking down on the people on that farm that maybe even think that they're no good, they're lazy, they're on the edge of criminals. Was that kind of situation a classist situation going on in local honey as well?
I think that was very much a part of it. When you think about it, back in the 1950s, there was a pretty rigid code that everybody was expected to live by. And I think that was probably something that would create problems for people that they didn't even realize were happening. So think of a girl who had a boyfriend, and the boyfriend went off to war.
Yes.
Maybe they were close enough that she got pregnant, and then
Right.
something happens. He dumps her. He's killed in the war. So many things could happen. What happened? Suddenly, she was expecting this guy to come back from the war, marry her, and they were going to have the white picket fence and the whole dream. That doesn't happen. Oh, but now you are a single woman with a child. And because you were never married to that soldier, you're not going to get the benefits. Now, some of that's changed over the years, but back in the 1950s, that was it. Tough luck. You're not married to a soldier. You're not going to get any
Right.
widows and orphans help. And suddenly people find themselves marginalized in a way that they weren't expecting.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we all know if you've seen a story that surrounds a movie, let's say, that surrounds World War II, or even a book that surrounds World War II, a lot of times that picture is not necessarily painted because they wanna keep that 1950s code era pristine,
Sure.
but yes, of course, that being human, and that I'm sure that happened to a lot of different young women, which is making me think, "Oh, wow, that was terrible," but it's
Eh,
bringing in the depth of your story. So, with the young woman coming back and her now former boyfriend is a police officer, is there a catalyst? Is there an event that happens in the book where he's in the middle between the love of the former girlfriend and the townspeople? Is there some
Sure.
type of catalytic
There is. In the book, when she comes back, he is already married and has kids. But the problem is problem. He married a woman who is from a different town in Maine, and they're living in Massachusetts. with 3 kids and him working weird hours, being a police officer, etc., she starts feeling really, I'm not going to say put upon, I'm going to say stressed because there's no support system for her, family support system, which again was such a part of the 1950s. And
Right.
at one point, after some minor conflicts between the two of them, she takes the kids and goes back to Maine and then basically tells him if he doesn't move up there with her, where she has her support system, that's going to be it for them.
Right.
Unfortunately, he has no job to move to. He loves his job being a police officer, and he's in town where suddenly he sees this woman, Becky, being hassled by the townspeople, and he starts feeling obligated to come to her defense. So
Um,
that's the catalyst from a romantic standpoint. I guess you
mhm.
could call it a love triangle, although
Right.
it happens at different times. One's there and gone, and one's there and gone. But he feels a tug in that direction of where does my loyalty lie now? And the thing is, when he starts getting more involved with Becky, he starts realizing that the kind of clean, happy, small town existence that he is involved with doesn't mesh with what her view of the world is. And so even as he tries to help her and get money for her and protect people who want to do harm, he's making decisions each time which are taking him in a different direction than he thought his life was going to go. In the meantime, you have to have real empathy for Becky because she wants to do what's right and helping other people, helping herself to try to build up the farm, etc., seems good. But then you realize that some of her mother's influence and ways of teaching her have rubbed off on her. And out of
Um,
desperation, she starts leveraging that again because if people are trying to kick her off of her land and she doesn't have
right.
money to help people,
Right.
there's a certain act of desperation. And so it ends
Absolutely.
up becoming multiple conflicts that this woman Becky is facing.
Wow. Wow. That certainly sounds intriguing. Now, let's put a pause on local honey and let's circle back a little bit. You have written prior, is it called a puzzle book series?
Puzzle Box Chronicle. That was actually it's actually a 6-book series. I just
Yes.
kept going with it because I had fun and I had again the two main characters, both to me interesting people. But in the I'll tell you what started the whole idea for writing that. Local Honey is actually my 10th book. The first two I wrote were nonfiction. Um,
Okay.
one of them was published by John Wiley and Sons. It was an internet business development book. So I had a long history of that. And I was actually a newspaper reporter before that for several years. So writing's been something I've done for years.
Absolutely.
But the Puzzle Box Chronicles, the idea got triggered, believe it or not, by an old episode of Antiques Roadshow I was
Oh,
watching probably 20 years ago at this point. And I just parked the idea and wrote about it later. But this guy brought in a puzzle box and it was made in Japan. And he said that he got it from a relative of his who said that soldiers used to either build these on ships or buy them when they were in ports overseas. And they were fun to use. And they also were a place that they could put their valuables and their last will and testament and photos and things like that. So that if the ship went down, they could throw the box overboard and somebody was much more likely to pick the stuff up if it was in a box like that than if
right.
not. And I just
Right.
thought that was a cool story. And I thought that could be the MacGuffin, for lack of a better term, for a larger story. When the
Yes.
time came to write about the 1890s, which I love and wanted to write about, that was perfect. That was a good one to choose.
Wow. And so the reason why I brought that up is, of course, I wanted to showcase the fact that you've written a lot of different books. But like you said, your first two books were nonfiction. Then you have that series of 6 books. But Local Honey seems to be totally different from the spectrum of what have written previously. Why did you? It's a historical novel like The
Yeah.
Puzzle, but why did you want to write that type of book?
I this is my adopted area. I grew up in central New York, but in my early 20s, I moved to Washington, D.C. Lived there for about 12 years, met my wife, had our kids there, etc. And we all liked New England. And DC is an increasingly weird place to live. So I'm glad I got out when I did. And it's in New England. I feel like when I come in here, I have an outsider's viewpoint and you start noticing things that sometimes the locals grew up with and just take for granted, but which jump out at you as being just different. I'm not going to say weird, just different from the words that they use to the look of the buildings and things like that. So as a writer, I'm like, this is really interesting. So I just wanted to set stories in New England. And so all of the Puzzle Box Chronicles are set here. Local Honey is set here. And some of my short stories are set here too. They have a few short stories floating around out there. So by doing that, I said, I don't necessarily want to write always about the same time period. I want to write about the same place in different time periods.
Got you. Very good. Very interesting. Now, when is Local Honey coming out? When is its publishing date?
It actually came out yesterday. Actually, the electronic version. My goodness. Excuse me.
You're fine.
The electronic version came out, I think, the day before 4th of July. So July 3rd. And then the print version came out yesterday here. Excuse me. I'm going to take a little cough drop.
Yeah.
So, yeah. We'll show you.
Okay, so it's available everywhere.
It's available right now on Barnes & Noble and Amazon, and then through distribution channels, it'll show up in other bookshops too. And I have a couple of coastal bookstores, because a lot of what I write about is coastal, and some coastal bookstores in New England carry it too, et cetera. Yeah, obviously, you want to get as broad a spectrum of distribution as you can get. And I'm finding it in other bookstores. I found one in the London bookstore one time somebody told me about. So I was like, that's cool to see your stuff travel around like that. I'm hoping for the same, obviously, for this book.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exciting news. And we will have a link to your materials, your website, and the podcast
Oh,
show notes, and in the video
thank
description
you.
box below. Shawn McCarthy, thank you so much for joining me today on the Bookaholic Podcast.
Absolutely glad to be here. Thank you, Deirdre.